Hello and welcome to the Module 3 summary on gathering the evidence. So far we've seen across the three units of this module that decision making requires local evidence if it's to be contextually sensitive, that this local evidence works alongside systematic reviews and of course at a specific level RCTs and epidemiological evidence in order to inform any decision. We've seen that sources of local evidence can be routine, so collected as part of administration systems, or ad hoc, perhaps a survey conducted by an academic institution locally, and they may collect data at a local level, such as a health authority, or a national level, such as a Ministry of Health, and of course this is compiled for such organisations as the World Bank and the World Health Organization. We've also seen that any decision should take into account the interests of a range of different stakeholders, characterised by John Gabay as the list of Ps. And we asked you to perform a stakeholder analysis to see where these stakeholders are at the moment and what sort of evidence would be required to help move them to where you want them to be. How should the quality of local evidence be assessed? Well, like other forms of evidence, such as published articles, which is the focus of Module 4, the quality of local evidence must be assessed. It mustn't be allowed to display a bias or to be unduly influential if it's of poor quality. Where data quality is poor, then interpretation can be difficult, and there's a danger that a faulty conclusion, and therefore a faulty policy option, may be drawn. So what sort of questions should we ask when we're assessing the quality of local evidence? Well, we need to know, is the evidence representative? Does it correctly represent the wider population from which it's drawn? We need to know, is the evidence accurate? Do the available data match the actual value of the outcome being measured? And are appropriate outcomes being reported? So are the measures the ones that we need to know about in order to evaluate the success of an interventional program? So we'd like to pause the recording here and ask you to discuss this point together in plenary. Is local evidence always the best source? So we'll get you to pause the recording and then you can continue once you've had this discussion. Well, local evidence does have some limitations. We need to be very cautious about using local evidence in isolation, and that's why we've focused on three main forms of evidence in this module. Local evidence may be more directly relevant to studies conducted elsewhere, but it may also be less reliable. It may be that there are less resources to do data collection, or even if the data collection has been done thoroughly, the validation and checking may have been shortcutted. And local data may also have limitations as a result of bias and imprecise results, because by its very nature, studies of a locality are a lot smaller than national or multi-regional studies. And so we'd like to invite you to make questions or comments about how you might assess the quality of local evidence, what factors you might take into account. And again, you can pause the recording if you wish to take this to an extended discussion. So, with regard to the module on gathering the evidence, what can we conclude? Well, we've seen from such organisations as NICE and from commentators like John Gabay, as well as from the different schema, that it's important not to get stuck in too narrow a definition of what evidence means. It's very tempting to think of the research evidence as being the only meaning of evidence. We must also avoid the trap of assuming that the evidence speaks for itself. All evidence requires context. It may be internally valid, in other words, a study may be well conducted, but it needs your interpretation to a particular context. And this role of interpretation can not be underestimated. We have to bear in mind that just because we fail to detect an effect doesn't necessarily mean that there is no effect. And we can detect strong evidence of effect in what we might regard as secondary or less important outcomes. When interpreting the evidence from complex interventions, you need to think about the plausibility, to do this you'll often look for explanations in terms of what's happening biologically, organisationally, socially and psychologically. And these sort of explanations will often be present in global evidence. They may not be present in the systematic reviews, but in a different sort of more theoretical literature. You also will need to have some assessment of the likelihood of success, bringing to bear your knowledge of local conditions and the knowledge that's held by local practitioners. And so here, in appropriate conclusion for this module, we can see the synergy or bringing together of global and local evidence. And so the take-home message from the module as a whole is that you should be prepared to embrace a range of evidence that includes evidence from systematic studies, evidence from practice, and to integrate this with evidence from the list of P's, all of the stakeholders, and so therefore integrate evidence with values. And so in essence what you're doing is what we started off with, bringing it all together to bring these three types of information together, but within an environmental and organisational context in order to make better decisions. This is the reference that we've drawn on throughout the module, and so thank you for your attention, and I hope you go on to enjoy Module 4. Thank you.